Everyone, this is Deadpool Negative. People often come up to me on the street and ask, "Hey, Deadpool Negative, what do you think is the best moment in Star Trek history?" And I'll tell them. I tell them, well, it's the scene where in this side of paradise where Captain Kirk, realizing he's the only one left on the bridge, decides to beam down to the planet. And then people say to me, "Hey, Deadpool Negative, what's the second best moment in Star Trek history?" And I say, obviously, it's Captain Sisko's monologue at the end of In the Pale Moonlight. And one day I'll explain why I think those are the two best moments in Star Trek history. And then people come up to me on the street and say, "Hey, Deadpool Negative, what's the third greatest moment in Star Trek history for you? And can you make a video about it?" Why, thank you. I will make a video about it. Because it's something I've been thinking of pretty much since the episode aired. I watched the clip of the scene, a minute 45 clip from the episode a million times. And, I've watched it so many times, I'm like, well, why don't you talk about why it's so important to you? And I'm going to talk what I think is the third greatest Star Trek moment in history for me. Because unlike those first two moments I mentioned, which are partially to do with Star Trek and Federation's ideals and what Star Trek is to a lot of people, I think just in terms of dramatic heft, it's more about the characters with this scene. And we're going to talk about obviously major spoilers for this. And that's season 3, episode 2 of Star Trek Picard. Episode Disengage. Really, I do not want you to watch this video unless you've seen the episode, because if you don't, you have to. Okay, I am friends with Robert Meyer Burnett, the Burnett Network, and as everybody knows, Mr. Burnett was given an early look at Star Trek Picard. Now, when that happened, he and I spoke off the internet about it, and he told me a few things that were kept secret. But he kept this moment from me, and I am internally grateful for him that he did. Star Trek season 3 of Picard was, well, it was really good. It has its flaws. I mean, recently, Chris Avellone, in his review of Fallout, took a kind of bizarre sideswipe at it. I'll quote from his review of Fallout, which I encourage you to read because I think it's a pretty effective review of Fallout. He says, "If you haven't seen it, season 3 of Picard is a masterclass in fan service, gives the audience arguably everything they've ever wanted." I wouldn't say that final season gave me everything I ever wanted, because I was satisfied with how the characters. I wouldn't say I needed anything at that point with the next generation characters. I also felt that I felt that like bringing the next generation characters was the best thing, because the first 2 seasons of Picard have been so wasteful and broken down that might as well at that point. But anyway, let me go over what Avellone said again. If you haven't seen it, season 3 of this is Chris Avellone. If you haven't seen it, season 3 of Picard is a masterclass in fan service, gives the audience arguably everything they've ever wanted, and is wildly entertaining. Wildly entertaining, yes. It also largely terrible random story that had me SMH repeatedly. That's not fair. The craftsmanship outside of fan service moments felt non-existent and non-cohesive. I really disagree with that. I do think Picard season 3, as wonderful as I found it to be, was flawed in some respects, but in terms of clarity of purpose, it stood head and shoulders over everything that is produced out of Secret Hideout Star Trek since 2017. I've watched all 5 seasons of Discovery, And I couldn't tell you what anybody involved in that show creatively in the writing department has wanted to do with that show since it started. I mean, it had a troubled development, which led to one of the most insane pilots of anything I've ever seen. They lost their showrunners. The original showrunners were fired in mid-season 2 for being abusive. The current showrunner. Okay, I think the best way. I don't want to get off of the Discovery Channel. I'll just say that the fourth season of Discovery, its main antagonist was a man who wanted to blow in the whole universe, to jump to another universe, to possibly find a friend of his he thinks is dead, even though he's not even sure the friend is dead. He just wants to get away. The antagonists of Star Trek Season 5 are two petty criminals who just want to escape. That's what I think is going on at Discovery. And anyway, any case. And Lower Decks is Lower Decks. Strange New Worlds is entertaining, but only in fits and starts, and will often ping pong wildly between, hey, that was a pretty good episode. Hey, that was so. What were you? You cannot. Please stop. That's my experience watching Strange World. Week to week, you don't know what you're going to get. Like something pretty entertaining, something simply good, or something completely inane and a complete waste of a talented cast's time. But Star Trek Picard seasons 1 and 2, which showrunner Terry Matalas was only partially involved with season 2, was pretty much completely, he and his writers were completely in charge of season 3. Season 3 of Picard felt like it knew what it wanted to do, and did it, which is a head and shoulders above everything else that's been produced for Star Trek in the past since 2017. So no, I'm not going to say the craftsmanship out of fan service felt non-existent and non-cohesive. I am disappointed at where the series. I will admit to disappointment at where the series kind of goes, because it just felt like, oh, it's that again. But on the other hand, the way it resolved itself really worked. It's pretty much saves any disappointment I have with that. And although interestingly, I'm not. But that's a story for another time. But I want to talk about what happens in specifically in Disengage, season 3, episode 2. One thing Robert did not tell me was that the character Jack Crusher, played by actor Ed Spielers, who's is best known probably at the same time he was appearing on You in a recurring role, and got his start in the Aragon movie. Lucky him. Is Jack Crusher, Beverly Crusher's son. And when I saw this character, first of all, I like Spielers. I think he's a very, very good presence. Like, he's kind of a cool, like, even they have him like in some, yeah, even when spouting some cliche dialogue, he really just has kind of an effortless kind of cool that you just, there's a scene, and when you first see him, like, he just has this reaction to Picard and Riker. When he meets Picard and Riker, he has a silent reaction to them that I think is just terrific. And when he says, "Oh, I'm Beverly's son," and he says it in a way that, well. So when I first saw this character, realized what this character was, I kind of giggled and I said, "Oh, I see. This is going to be misdirection," because what I knew, I remember thinking as I was watching the show, like I said, Robert gave me some details that a lot of people didn't know about, but I told Robert, it's like, this Vadic can't be the final boss. This Vadic is working for somebody. I mean, it took me a while to guess who they were working for, and they also what they were. It was interesting. Like Vatic was, and I was glad because I don't think Vatic in the end was particularly an effective antagonist. Although Amanda Plover gave it her all. Um, but when I saw Jack Crusher, I thought, okay, this is another misdirection. This is another trick. You know, they're setting this guy up as to be. They want us to think this is Jean-Luc Picard's son, and that's not going to be the case. He's just going to be some guy. No, he's Jean-Luc Picard's son. Huh. But it didn't bother me because the way it pays off, and like because to me, when they announced they were coming back to Picard, there was only one direction left this character could go. One aspect of the character that had never been explored before, and that's Picard as a parent. Like Star Trek Generations, as bad as it is, does have a germ of a good idea in there. And it is Picard realizing that he never had a family and he's now officially the last of his line in the wake of the deaths of his brother and nephew. Would he go into the Nexus? Would he choose to live inside the Nexus to have a family? I mean, that movie completely botches it. I mean, completely botches it. There's so much that movie botches that I really wish someone had just, animated those Shatner novels. People would have been into those, but that's another story. And Picard, when it was announced, I hoped they would do that, and they seem to be going in that direction with one character. It's I'm blanking on the name because I don't like thinking about the first seasons of Picard, but they seem to sort of be going in that direction with the Soji character. I never remembered. And then they just seem to drop it because like so much of Picard feels utterly piecemeal and does not flow from one scene to the next correctly. It's dropped. And then the second season Picard is exploring stuff that on one level I understand what they were trying to do. On the other level, it just doesn't work at all. But I think Terry Matalas understood that was the idea of Picard as a parent was a thread worth pulling, something worth digging into, and making him Beverly's son. I was never a huge fan. Like, I'm not a shipper guy, so like the idea of Beverly and Jean-Luc together never really, it didn't register with me. I think, but we're getting off track. We're getting to I want to get to the scene because in this story of Picard season 3, Beverly has not spoken to Jean-Luc Picard for 20 years. She hasn't spoken to anyone on the Enterprise. She pretty much went off the grid. And we find out that's because of Jack. She had Jack, didn't tell Picard about it. She has a reason. She does explain it. And yeah, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. She did not tell him. I want to say the writers and Gates McFadden do a great job of Beverly making her case. But that doesn't ignore the fact that it sucks. I'm going to go on a tangent here, and I'm going to say real quickly that I think Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls is one of the worst things ever conceived by a human mind. It's actually not that terrible, but that's what I like to say about it. And people always ask me, "Oh God, is this the fridge?" It's like, no, I don't have that much of a problem with the fridge. It's bad, but what I can't stand is the fact that Marion kept Mutt from Indy. I don't buy that for a second. I mean, Karen Allen can't make that dialogue work. And I just think it's cruel and mean, and it's just meant because the man who directed it doesn't know how to relate to people, to families, unless they're broken. He doesn't understand. He doesn't think his audience cares about that unless they're bickering like idiots over parentage. And I just thought it was a stupid, stupid thing. And I have not sat through a Steven Spielberg film in 16 years because of it. Not a single one. Not a single new Spielberg film. So because it sucks, it just sucks. And the movie tries to make the argument that Indy would have been an absent father. Temple of Doom is all about how a great dad Indiana Jones is. So that argument doesn't wash either. Okay, end of that story. But Jean-Luc Picard was famously prickly around kids on the show. He just didn't like them. Like a lot of normal adults don't like kids. So giving him a son, him being a parent, is a worthy idea to explore. And I'm going to go to the scene now. The scene, basically, in the context of the series, I'm not going to. I don't feel like explaining what's going on, but the bad guys have caught up. Bad guys, Vadic and her army, her ship, have caught up with the Titan. And they want Jack for reasons that aren't exactly clear, even by the end of the series, given what Jack turns out to be. They want him, and they'll destroy the Titan to do it. And Jack decides, I'm going to beam myself over there. And Captain Shaw and Picard Captain Shaw says, like, look, whoever this kid is, he's not worth the lives of my crew. And Picard understands that. He's doing like, so he's heading towards the transporter. He's going to beam himself over there. And Picard is reluctant to let Beverly's son sacrifice himself, but he also understands that he's a grown man who can make his own decisions. Ed Spillers is 35. I think Jack Crusher is meant to be a 10 years younger than that. Ed Spillers is a good actor. He's not Jessica Parker Kennedy. I'll just say that. Jack has lived his life outside of the Federation. He's lived his life on the fringe. His mother, to protect him, his mother kept him on the fringes of society, where he learned basically to be an underhanded criminal, although with guidance. He's most of the time working as a Doctors Without Borders, as a smuggler, as a work with Doctors Without Borders. It's very Han Solo, but again, Spielers makes it work. So he knows what he's doing, but he's going to do it to protect his mother. And then, and I should mention, like, Will Riker knows almost instantly that Jack is Jean-Luc Picard's son. Jean-Luc doesn't even enter into his mind. Like Jean-Luc is like, what? No. Can we talk about this later? That's not what he says, but that's kind of his reaction to it. But and Riker realizing what's about to happen, I shall say at this point in the story, like, Beverly's been injured and incapacitated. She doesn't know what's going on. So Riker goes down to the med bay and says to Dr. Oak, the Trill doctor, says, wake her up. So let's roll back. So this scene, I'm going to set this 1 minute 54 minute scene. Picard is on the bridge. Picard with Shaw, the captain of the Titan. He knows what Jack is going to do, and he regrets it, but I'm not, but Shaw's like, look, if this is going to save us, we need to do this. And Picard reluctantly agrees. And there's this frame shot of Patrick Stewart's face, and the score is terrific, I should say. And it's building and building and building, and we hear a door. This frame shot of Patrick Stewart's face. We hear a door opening, and then Patrick Stewart glances just out of the frame, and in walks Riker, guiding Beverly, and a lesser show would have had Beverly say, "Jean-Luc, don't. He's your son," or "Jean-Luc, don't." Or no, that's what makes this scene so brilliant to me. Why I've watched it 100 times, because nothing is said at all. Yates McFadden acts her heart out because she just looks at Jean-Luc Picard and she's trying to say something. She's trying to say something, but to admit that to say out loud that Jack is not just her son, but their son, is to admit she's spent decades hiding from Jean-Luc and lying to Jean-Luc. And as Jean-Luc says in another episode, you've cut me out of the biggest decision of my life. And it's cruel and it's wrong. And what can you say in a moment like that? And Picard doesn't say anything either. There's just this long hold on his face. And he closes his eyes. And he says, he shouts, obviously. He says, "Belay those orders, lock it down." And he says to Shaw, "The boy stays here." Of course, Shaw, played brilliantly by Todd Stashwick, I should point out. Like, Todd Stashwick, show, terrific. He says, "Why are you doing this?" And Picard says, "Because he's my son." And I've run over that scene in my head I've watched it so many times. And I think um, what really gets under my skin about it is the fact that at that point in Picard's life, he had, like, the first two seasons of Picard are just so bad about what they want, and at the end of the second, we like, basically the second season is 10 episodes of Q screwing with Picard impart the message that he's got to live a little. The opening of season 3, he's just hanging out with Orla Brady, the Vulcan lady, or the Romulan lady, I should say. Again, what a tremendous waste of a talented actress that was. But then at the end, like, so was Fringe. Like, British American shows, stop casting that woman. You don't know how to use her. But he was still relatively alone in a way. I mean, he'd had a distinguished career as a member of the Federation that ended badly, but it was still important. But finding out that after all this time that he is a father, it's beautiful. It's just a beautiful scene, and I think what will always stick with me about that scene is, like, no matter how dark things can get, and what's interesting is, like, in terms of lighting, Picard is one of the darkest seasons of television ever seen, because I think that was also for budgetary reasons. And but as bleak as and things get really bad for Picard, for the crew of the Titan, and the crew of the Enterprise, and Jack Crusher and the Federation as a whole by the end of the season. What I think, despite everything that can happen to you, there are always possibilities. Um, I'm not going to spoil what happens at the end of Picard season 3, but it's a relatively happy ending if you don't count the fact that other certain things that have happened. But it meant so much more for someone like Jack Crusher to be in the picture than for Q to just say, "Hey, lighten up." I think that's what makes it so powerful to me. Like your your future is not always lost to you. Sometimes there is hope. Sometimes there are possibilities. And for Jean-Luc Picard, Jack Crusher is that possibility. A renewed relationship with Beverly Crusher is that possibility. You know, being the captain he always, being the great captain he always was again is another possibility. There's hope, but sometimes you got to let that hope in. I know it's kind of a strange thing to talk about, but it's something I really wanted to get out of my head because it's been there for 18 months. And anyway, but I wanted to talk about that scene and what it meant to me and how it really, watching it again and again, just makes me feel good. I mean, at the end of the day, Picard season 3 is the best season of Star Trek television I once owned softcore porn of. No, that's just a joke. That's just a joke. I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it. It's a weird, but no, that's just a joke. I don't own softcore porn of any Star Trek actors presently. Anyway, hit the notifications, like and subscribe, and just watch Picard season 3.